Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jeremy Fuchs with Checkpoint's Office of the CTO. I'm really excited to welcome everybody into today's webinar. We are going to be talking about the Enterprise and Hybrid Mesh Firewall Assessment done by Miercom. We're going to dig into the results and have time to answer some questions. So I'm really excited to be joined from Miercom itself, Rob Smithers, the CEO of Miercom, who conducted this test that we're going to talk about. And from the Checkpoint side, Dave Groner, one of our product marketing managers. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank Rob and Dave for lending their time as well. And we're really excited to get started. Please feel free to place any questions you may have in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can during the course of this webinar. So let's get going, everybody. So Rob, I want to start with you. It's just a simple question. You can just kind of introduce yourself and your background and explain a little bit about what Miercom is and what they do.
Sure. Thank you for the nice intro there, Jeremy. So, Miercom, I'm Rob Smithers. Pleased to connect here on Internet land. We've conducted product testings and evaluations for the last 35 years, longer than any other test lab on the planet. We co-publish articles with leading magazines, online and print magazines. So we really have a passion in competitive comparison, testing and analysis, and I'm truly blessed. I have some wonderful engineers. Appreciate you saying I conducted the test, but actually I've got some very smart engineers that worked hand in hand with Checkpoint and the other vendors' engineers on their evaluation. But I'm honored to present the results of our findings. So we're as good as actually the best test tools on the market that we utilize in our evaluation. So these are very specialized vendors and products to conduct the analysis so they can be done repeatedly, consistently, with configurations that anyone would have access to these tools. However, in this review, one request that we had is, could we use more open source? Could we use more things that someone evaluating the product, they might not have a Spirent test tool or a Breaking Point test tool, either very expensive. So we did add an element in this review for some open source tools, open source samples in our analysis to make it easy to reproduce. And actually, the next slide leads into.
Yeah, there you go. That's right into my next question. Just to kind of give us a brief overview of the report. What was the purpose of it? What was some of the testing criteria that you guys were looking for?
Okay, so a little bit of a busy slide here, a little bit of a busy slide. The one diagram is a kind of an overview of how we would test, in this case, more of a premise firewall, but we actually did more than premise firewall testing, and I'll get to that in a minute. At the bottom is a little key, little acronym soup. All these acronyms, CISA, KEV, MBD, what do they mean? So we're illustrating them there because I will use these names, these acronyms later in the presentation. But the overview of the report, the bottom line in analyzing the hybrid mesh firewall, we were interested in each vendor's solution's ability to detect zero-day or close to zero-day malware and stop it, new threats, phishing prevention by way of malicious URLs. I'd like to see the remote user for the remote user, home user, teleworker people, their protection that they had from an SSE standpoint. And we also added an element called a CISA KEV analysis, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency's known exploit vulnerabilities down there on the left in the yellow. And that's important. We'll get to a slide on that. I'll explain what that's about. It's available for anyone to do their own CISA KEV analysis, but we'll show what we found. And each solution, really, we looked into your ability to stop malware, antivirus, your intrusion prevention, your ability to stop bots, URL filtering, sandboxing. And I particularly I was interested in the AI machine learning, artificial intelligence machine learning that the different vendors' products happen to have. So it's no longer just an NGFW, next generation firewall bake-off. We have to look at more things, more areas of threat, and we have to look at how that coverage is provided.
Fantastic. And so the testing was done over a 3-month period. You used sets of 500 files for virus total. wondering if you just kind of walk us through just a little bit more about the testing methodology with VirusTotal and why you chose this approach and how it provides kind of the most accurate picture of measuring firewall
Yeah.
performance.
Yeah, fair enough. If you remember earlier, you don't have to jump back to it, but we had a slide with all these test tools that provide this kind of testing and have their canned libraries and proprietary libraries to use. We chose VirusTotal, which Google owns, to provide us the open source available, most recent threats that have been discovered on the internet, something anybody just from home could download and get. We repeated the test over 3 months' time, wanting to see consistent results, downloading, retesting to make sure all vendors' solutions, eh, we saw similar results over time, to make sure there was no strange anomalies. But the VirusTotal, that's that open source part that I mentioned. I'd like to have something in the environment that somebody else could reproduce, someone interested in examining your product, another vendor perhaps. So we've chosen VirusTotal because it's Google, and wow, they've got the mother load of malware out there for the samples used in testing.
I think that's a important point again, just kind of talk about the open source nature of this. We would talk about it a little bit, but also the fact that, these tests can be replicated by anybody watching.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this slide are the two sources for the phishing URLs. We like fishtank.org, OpenFish. There's a lot of sources. Anyone, you could download your own malicious or potentially malicious URLs and test it. And again, all the test tools have their complements as well. Of course, we use them. But for the testing featured in this report, anyone could reproduce this testing with their own downloads from OpenFish, FishTank, and VirusTotal.
And I just want to make sure we state this, Rob. These are not simulations. These are actual uh, malicious URLs, malicious phishing.
Yeah, use care when handling. I guess I should be careful when I say
That's why I brought. That's why I'm bringing
anyone at
it
home
up.
could do this because you're about to infect your computers if you don't have good countermeasures. So yes,
Exactly. Yeah.
care definitely needs to be taken. We should probably put a disclaimer, please,
Yeah.
if you're listening to this webinar, make sure you have sufficient, we like to do it on a virtual machine where this testing's done, so you can contain that. You can download VMware Workstation or Oracle Box, lots of different things. Don't infect your base computer in doing this analysis. Make sure you have an environment where it's somewhat disposable. Maybe a VM for those downloads if you want to try clicking on things and so forth, because these are malicious and it will mess up your day.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, probably a little bit more than just your day. So getting into the meat of the report. So the report throughout kind of distinguishes between prevent and detection only metrics. You can see here on the slide. Can you kind of explain what the difference is between prevent and detect only? And then also why some vendors seem to handle those two components a little bit differently?
Yeah, sure. It's actually a very, very good question, and thank you for prepping the slide there. The prevent means obviously stopping it before even the first sample gets on your network. A detect approach would be perhaps someone downloaded something, or the NGFW or the countermeasures detected some kind of issue, and it sent the analysis over to perhaps sandboxing or for further analysis. So it's under review. Under review, Palo's case, 25%. Doesn't mean that they say they were malicious or not. It's just they're under review. They were detected as potentially malicious, and at a later time, once they confirm it's malicious, then those files will then be blocked. So it's a matter of a time to block, who blocks first, and who blocks accurately first. Because you're coming in second place if you're detecting and then later on in the day or tomorrow deciding you're going to block those samples. So there's a distinct advantage to blocking first, provided it is in fact malicious stuff that you're blocking. But showing the detect numbers as well, clearly shows us that the samples used in testing were suspicious enough for the other vendors to detect it. So I guess we're trying to give everyone credit where credit's due in being able to perhaps determine what might be malicious. But the prize goes to who blocks the most right out the get-go the soonest. That's what you want these for.
And you'll see here kind of on the top for folks looking the term 0 day plus one or 0 plus 1 day for both for malware prevention, Ray. We also talk about it in terms of malicious URL detection. Just so everybody's on the same page, what exactly is 0 day plus one? What does that mean and why is it important?
So that's a way to describe malware that's been recently discovered within the last 24 hours. In a true 0 day, we'd have to design ourselves and no one would know it. And that's a different kind of test. But a Z plus one is within the first 24 hours of some malware being discovered. If we go to VirusTotal, where we source these, I looked for concurrence with at least 25 vendors that, yeah, this is new. And I have 25 vendors saying, yeah, this is a potential problem. So I look for a high degree of likelihood that it is malicious. And I also look that it was reported within the last 24 hours through VirusTotal. So these are a very good set, a very rich set with a high level of concurrence that, yeah, this seems to be some newer strain of malware. Maybe it was modified, maybe they obscured something, maybe it was polymorphic. Who knows? However, the bad guys do what they do. But so our 0 day, near 0 day analysis for the vendor shown here, again, Checkpoint with that first to block did an excellent job. Actually achieved not just a certified secure, but a rated best. This is the third time we've looked at Checkpoint, and they've been very deliberate and very consistent with the detection of the near 0 day malware.
And the same thing, applies for phishing URLs. And I'm curious to kind of get your understanding of, typically there's always a trade-off of high detection, high false positives. And I wonder if you can kind of break down a little bit, A, just how you kind of factored in false positives into the test, but B, how it played out within the results.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, right? What's hiding up the sleeves there? If it blocks everything, well, is it going to start blocking my Word doc? Is it going to start blocking my site report that I've got to get to my boss because there's some macros in it? Very, very important question. Being able to detect and block quick, that's great, provided you don't have false positives and you're blocking stuff or slowing stuff down or giving me grief on basic communications. Are you being overly analytical? Are you over blocking? So the looking at false positives is important. And on this analysis, I can tell you, at least with the VirusTotal, with a VT of 25 vendors correlating, we did not have many false positives that could be tested in the mix, for one. So these had a high correlation rate of 0 day malware that turns out, yeah, they were malicious. So we didn't have a lot of those in the mix for this one. But we do intermix regular traffic along with the malicious traffic when we do the tests, just to make sure, yeah, it blocked the malicious file, but hey, it didn't block my background file of normal traffic going. So we did that on all the vendors, and I'm actually happy to report the vendors all five of these vendors did a pretty good job at discerning from false positives. They really did.
Anything you want to say about the misdetection piece of it?
Missed detection. Okay, so well, in this case, this graph is showing missed malicious URLs. So from increasing amount of missed samples. So those samples that we downloaded from OpenFish, for example, Checkpoint only missed one. Palo missed 5, Fortinet missed 10. So less is more. Less is more in this case. And these also, using those sites, we grabbed the newer samples, ones that were out fairly recent within 24 hours for this testing. So less is more for the malicious URL.
Less is better.
Less is better. Thank you.
No, it's all good. So Jeremy mentioned false positives. You want to touch on some of the key factors you consider?
Yeah, we like to do 4 things for false positive testing. One is have benign samples intermixed with your test malicious samples. In other words, have enough complement. More like 99% of this traffic stream should be composed of a mix of different application traffic and file types. And only 1% malicious when we do our testing. So we're looking to see if any of those white samples are inadvertently blocked as a false positive. That's number one. Number 2, we apply gray samples, challenging sets. Now, maybe it's a Word document or Excel with some excessive macros in it. not malicious, but there's a lot going on in the file that could trip up the detection algorithms. Perhaps an encrypted zip file with 3 passwords deep. We'll do things to trip up the detection, not inherently malicious, but things that are or signs that the content could be suspicious. So those are our gray samples that we apply in the testing. Not malicious, but I'm trying to trip you up. The third is we have a very rich set of samples. We know what vendors block and don't block and have missed for false positives. We will retest false positives that any vendor had a problem with as part of our complement. And lastly is something that we've added recently. You know how we go to VirusTotal, I look for 25 vendors that concur. This is newly found malware, it's malicious. If I grab samples that only 1 or 2 vendors have concurrence on, well, now you got something. It could be malicious, it might not. So we've recently added in a mix of samples from VirusTotal, which have a lower concurrence. That means not all the vendors have jumped on the bandwagon yet. So that would be another source of potentially malicious files or files that just confuse some vendors. So that's a fourth good source for false positive testing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Looking ahead a little bit to another sort of key component of the report, which is the CISA CAV, and you kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning. Sort of explain a little bit, maybe a little bit more detail what the CISA CAV evaluation is, and then B, what does the number of CISA CAVs tell us about each individual firewall?
Oh yeah, really good question there. So I appreciate the key at the bottom there. So it all starts with NIST, the National Institute of Standards Technology. They have a website for National Vulnerabilities Database, the NVD. And there's give or take 250,000 known exploits since they started tracking, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. But 250,000 known exploits, CVEs they're called. So you look at these vulnerability exposures, right? CVEs, and that's a lot of them. CISA came out, Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency said, yeah, 250,000 is a lot to keep on your mind. They pick out maybe 1,000 and 952 last check of the most lethal, the most common, out of all the CVEs in the NVD. They said, let's look at the most known exploited vulnerabilities. Let's call it KEV. So CISA created KEV, a subset of 1,000 from the 250,000 CVEs. And they're saying these are the 1,000 we should be most concerned with. We're seeing them in the government today. We're seeing them in enterprises today. They either have a high rate of damage, or they're extremely common. There's something that makes it an attribute that sets it apart from the other 250,000. So these 1,000 or so KEV vulnerabilities are important to test with. I could test all of them. I could look at lots of ways, but I want to make sure I nail the ones that CISA is saying are important right now.
And Rob, can I just add something? It's on your slide. What makes them different as well, the KEVs, even though it's a much smaller number, 1,000 or whatever. The rule is they do not publish these unless A, they have been exploited for real in the wild, not in the lab, but out in the real world. And then secondly, if I remember correctly, they also give the vendor in question time to come up with a patch. Right? They don't just want to publish, hey, here's a known vulnerability that's being exposed. Let's tell the world. They wait right until there's actually a patch so that the rest of the world can actually deal with it before hackers jump all over it.
Yeah, that's great points, Dave. Absolutely. Nobody wants to provide the recipe for disaster and be the one, hey, by the way, I can hack servers by doing this without the known cure. So yeah, they are a little slower on publishing a known exploited vulnerability until the whoever that's directed at has an opportunity to protect themselves. That's a great point. And they do occur for real. So that's not just in a lab. So you can go to the CISA website yourself to examine the KEV catalog, known exploit vulnerabilities catalog, to search things, to see which vendors have more things listed on the KEV. to see which vendors have more coverage of the exploits contained within a KEV. But again, it's another open source place to get your information. Oh, this helps a lot. The key comparison per firewall vendor. So we look at that CISA KEV site for two things, right? The first thing I'm interested, say your 952 instances of known exploit vulnerability. I want to see the security vendor, how many of those do you actually block or detect? If they're within your purview, if it's something that you should be able to block or detect, or the word coverage is also used. We cover that. We have awareness of it, and we can stop an exploit of that vulnerability. So that's one thing I look at. How does each firewall vendor, each mesh hybrid vendor cover down on those important things? And then secondly, I'd like to know how many of the exploits which are currently be reported, as active, how many of those is that vendor responsible for contributing to? I.e., if it's a security firewall, has it had vulnerabilities in itself, and that's listed on the KEV? So you don't want your name as a vendor listed under the KEV as a known vulnerability. You do want your name known as we block all these known exploited vulnerabilities. So we look at it both ways.
And that leads us into this image here, which is talking about, KEVs that each vendor has mitigated. So what are we looking at here, and what do these metrics tell us?
That 952, you block 866, more than any other vendor, which was fabulous. And when I looked a little bit deeper, well, geez, what about those ones we miss? There are some KEVs which would not be applicable here. Perhaps it was for mobile device. And hey, we were testing NGFWs and SASE. We weren't testing mobile device. So certain types of exploits aren't even applicable for what we did here. But by far, you got the mother load of them. Congratulations. And I believe the bulk of what was not detected was deemed either they've been deprecated, they're no longer relevant due to something else, or the attack vector is not really part of this assessment. We have another webinar where we look at checkpoints and mobile threat defense that we're going to look at and how they do well on that. But in this case, we did the SASE, the SSE, the cloud, and the premise firewall. So some of those samples were not appropriate for any vendor in this analysis. The other side of the coin, right? So you block the vast majority of them, better than any other vendor. And the number of KEVs that are actually caused by checkpoint, like, oops, we have some issue, we had to, and I believe this was late in 2024, somebody reported a potential vulnerability that checkpoint quickly patched. But so you only have a hit of only one thing in the whole existence of CISA KEV to be concerned with for your product, which is
And
great.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was this a 12-month look back in the KEV catalog? You guys remember?
Oh, could have been a year. It could have been a year. Maybe that's. I'd have to check, Dave, but I'm pretty
But you're
sure.
right. You're right that the one KEV that was associated checkpoint was
Yeah.
2024. That's why I'm wondering. We can double check that, but I could have sworn it was
Yeah.
definitely a maximum of 3 years, right? But it was
Yeah, not more than 3. It could
yeah.
have been a
Okay.
year.
Yep.
Don't quote me on that. But the important thing here, though, is like Cisco. Well, they got a lot of hardware. They got a lot of routers. They got switches and stuff. We removed. This is strictly KEVs related to a security product. To be
Right.
fair, because if I tax Cisco with every firewall switch exploit known, that number would mushroom much higher. So to keep it on point, since we're talking about security, these are all security appliance, security service related known vulnerabilities to keep it apples to apples.
Right. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about intrusion prevention, but we also want to kind of mention this year, SASE, SSE was added to your assessment. So I'm kind of curious a little bit thought process behind that. When, what was the compelling event maybe that made you decide, hey, we got to add SASE and SSE?
Okay. Good. Well, I can talk IPS for there was SASE.
Why
So
don't you do SASE and then we can go back to IPS?
sure,
That's fine.
sure.
Yeah.
So traditionally, last few years, we've done next-gen firewall, more premise analysis. Sometimes we did next-gen firewall just in the cloud analysis. Sometimes we just looked at SSE, by itself analysis. But when rubber meets the road and what customers need is they need the same level of protection, whether they're in the corporate enterprise office, whether they're in that OT environment with the working on the government infrastructure, critical infrastructures, or if they're working home, or they're at Starbucks and they're relying on a firewall as a service, or if they're wherever they're working, they're accessing cloud resources, the same level of protection, coverage, and consistency is needed because those are all links of the chain, right? So you could have the best premise NGFW in the world, but meanwhile, your remote users are just kind of hanging in the breeze there. And they might bring something back in to the hive that you don't want them to bring in. So looking at the hybrid mesh firewall, all three areas, the firewall as a service supporting the remote workforce, including the SSE and SASE, your firewalls designed for cloud use that are out there, and the premise firewall. We look at all three in this analysis. So we broke the charts down to include how is the malware and malicious URL detection at the edge for those SSE users. We looked at accessing things from the cloud and how well that was blocked by the vendors. And of course, the premise, the IT and the OT, your core that you want to protect. So it isn't sufficient anymore to have just a good NGFW. You really got to provide that coverage for all of the ingress vectors. And very happy to see this was a similar test done on that remote user on how well could it block threats, malware in this case, as opposed to the premise user, behind that NGFW. So we ran the analysis in those different areas to see that the efficacy, and it's pretty good across the board for most vendors, but Checkpoint with that consistent 99, very, very consistent, very solid. And we did notice a bump up a little bit on Palo. I only looked at block only. I did not look at detect versus protect in this analysis. We gave credit for the vendor blocking the malicious attack from the SSE SASE perspective. Secure service edge, secure access service edge, I believe. So that's that other area that we're concerned with the users these days for sure.
Hey, Jeremy, do you mind if we go back a slide
Yeah.
here or two? I wanted to pick up on one, and thanks, Rob. Pick up on one thing. Can you translate or keep me honest here? So when I see KEV associated to a product, so in this case, firewall, what's the net result of a known exploited vulnerability to an end user? Someone's using a product. They're going to have to apply a patch, right? That's the whole premise.
Right. You would want to know any vendors, products that you have in your location. You'd want to look them up and make sure you have all those patches applied. You might be using a vulnerability management product, a VM product, to tell you, hey, I see these products in your environment. I see it doesn't have the latest version of OS. You might want to update it. So there are tools that help with that. But I would certainly not hesitate to look up at SysAkev, any vendor that I'm working with, to see how many known exploits they are responsive to or they're responsible for. And I would also look to them to see what is that vendor claiming for coverage.
Yep, understood. So did you want to touch on the IPS, how you tested the intrusion prevention?
Right. So the IPS testing, now that's a little trickier than downloading malware, looking at the SysAkev catalog, downloading malicious URLs. Your IPS now, those are active exploits. So you either have to pay a hacker or white hat to do it, replay some traffic patterns, or do something. So that's a little more sophisticated is the IPS test, but it's directly correlates to the known exploits, critical exploits, things that are very severe. What that is that's the attempt to use that vulnerable. It's the actual exploit itself happening. Maybe the Kev rating says, oh, there's a problem with this memory register, this password's too short, and requires a patch. Okay. The intrusion prevention is someone actually trying to beat on that exploit to break in. So the IPS directly correlates to a lot of the known exploits, and it maps with the criticality as well. We were very pleased to see we did this test with this was with Breaking Point Strike. We also have some PCAP replayability. If you have PCAP files, those are the network capture files from Wireshark. If anyone needs to replay them and see them themselves, we do have PCAP replay. But the main delivery mechanism would be well, either Spirent, Test Center, Security Center, or Breaking Point Strike, and those correlate to the KEV as well, as far as critical and high exploitable things.
Thank you. That's great.
Fantastic. So as we sort of start to wind down here, we want to obviously thank Rob for his time. If you want to sort of give off the little final, I don't know, the final review or final grade for Checkpoint, I mean, then we can go into some final questions. But obviously, we're very proud of how Checkpoint performed on these assessments.
I'm proud of both Miercom and Checkpoint engineers. You guys really went through a lot for this certification. It's not given. You can't buy it. It has to be earned, and you all worked extremely hard at flushing out these very challenging tests. So I'm very proud at what you've all accomplished here. And I'm seeing a trend. I'm seeing a trend in the industry that Checkpoint's closely following, right? Providing that uniform coverage, consistency, better than anybody, detection and block, quick first to block and blocking accurately, that you're on the trend. So you're making the right moves apparently. And Checkpoint was one of the vendors that was most flexible as far as pivoting and like, well, we don't just want to do NGFW. We want to look at more things. Checkpoint was the first vendor that said, yeah, let's roll. We're ready to go. I'm still trying to explain it to some of the other vendors, like why we're doing that. It's like, well, because that's what a customer would want. I want protection. I don't just want protection here. So your ability to pivot and provide that coverage impressed the heck out of me. And probably AI, your implementation of AI is really impressive.
So as we wrap up here, and again, we were kind of going through the questions here. We appreciate everybody's time. As you kind of think ahead to the future, especially in this new, AI world that we're all living in, are there anything from a threat perspective, from a trend perspective, that will shape or should shape the next generation of firewall technology?
Well, I think you hit it with the AI. I mean, that's a double-edged sword. Bad guys are using it too, right? The bad guys are using it. They're smart, so they're making their offensive, their attacks, the things that they're developing, more adaptive, more flexible, quicker to cause damage, hide their tracks. So AI being implemented on the offensive is definitely a bit of a game changer. And of course, we're implementing, at least Checkpoint and other vendors are implementing AI on your countermeasures. And three areas I saw Checkpoint excel at with implementing AI. And it's under the hood. It's not like we can turn it on or off. Let me show it with and without AI. Can't do that. It's in there. It's cooked in the sauce, and it does a great job on improving your efficacy and determining friend from foe. So it does real. But the other thing clearly, because you have all these threat feeds, all these different sources coming in, one thing giving Checkpoint the edge, in my opinion, in determining friend to foe, to block quicker, to take all those feeds and determine if it's malicious or not, for sure, is the implementation that you're using in your AI back office. That's quicker than any human can do. So you have some machine learning and AI going on, which is allowing you to make that determination, malicious or not, quicker than the other vendors. You clearly have that. And we went one step further with Checkpoint on the AI. I looked at two things. I said, yeah, could I use the AI against Checkpoint? Could I use AI with the configuration screens? I'm an administrator. Can I overstep my bounds for permission levels using AI assistant, AI Copilot with Checkpoint? And we found out we could not. The AI Copilot was smart enough to limit what it would tell me, show me, and do to what my credential level was. So we were looking for using AI inappropriate, and you put rails on there so that the AI could be used properly. And you also have it where it will assist configuring the device well, quicker. And lastly, that the correlating all those points of detail to make a suggested blockade rule is amazing. All these things going on in your threatscape, you can interpret that information and come up with a correlation of things, seemingly unrelated things, to make a suggestion or to alarm somebody about. So hats off on how you're implementing AI. Please keep continuing to do that, because the bad guys certainly aren't slowing down. They're implementing it as well.
For sure. It's the AI arms race is the new term. So we want to point everybody here, please download, read the report, miercom.com/checkpoint. Remember, we can replicate the test as an open source, so you can test it for yourself and don't just take our word or Rob's word for it. I want to leave everybody with one final question that comes from Rob, and I think is really at the end of the day, what's of utmost importance. If you're an organization and you're evaluating firewall technology, it can be challenging. There's a lot of solutions out there. You got to wade through a lot of things. Based on your findings, based on your experience, what advice can you give to an organization that's evaluating enterprise firewall solutions at the moment?
Well, I would say don't be in a rush. Don't be in such a rush. Don't be afraid to look outside the box. There's a lot of great vendors out there. I for one would want some consistency. A vendor that's been in this market knows a couple things, been doing it for quite a while. I'd look for consistency. I'd look for a vendor that provides that breadth of coverage, whether it be premise, hybrid, teleworker, cloud, what have you, so that I don't have to buy too many solutions that, quite frankly, could get confusing with the interface. Hear that single pane of glass. So I'd like to see everything unified, managed, great protection, and someone that's had a history of doing that well, not just a one-hit wonder on one report, would be things that interest me. And take your time, do your field trials. Most vendors are more than happy to help with proof of concept analysis. And yeah, and as you mentioned, if any of our threat samples, method of evaluation could be helpful in that purpose, so all free to download and let people explore on their own.
No, Rob,
Hey,
thanks very much for your time. It's
yeah,
been
thank you
great.
so much, Rob. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And we appreciate everyone's time and look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.